Today we are discussing mortgage and charge, which only transfers some right to another party who, for securing the payment, gets an interest in the specific immovable property. Now, as we look into this aspect of law, one thing you should appreciate is that apart from basic tenets of law, which is specific for each part of mortgage, most of the provisions are subject to contracts which are to the contrary, which is to contrary to the parties that they arrive at. Further, law does not allow anyone to take advantage of their own wrong. So, very common sense approach, logical approach. Therefore, when the mortgage is created, why is a mortgage created? When a person is in need of money, he requests some other person to give him, lend him money, to help him, and to secure that money, to secure the payment of that money, a mortgage is created. In such a scenario, the person who creates the mortgage is the mortgager. The person who lends the money is called the mortgagee, and principal money and interest is called mortgage money. Now, therefore, very simple and logical definition, which is provided under section 58, is that mortgage is transfer of an interest in immobile property for purpose of securing the money advanced or to be advanced by way of a loan or an existing future debt or the performance of an engagement which may give rise to pecuniary liability. Now, why it says an existing future debt, I will explain to you the different subsequent provisions where parties have arrived at an understanding whereby monies are paid in installments, and even that is secured by the existing security that is created. So once we go forward, I will explain to you that's under section 79 of the Transfer of Property Act. Now, mortgage are of six kinds. That is simple mortgage, mortgage by conditional sale, usufructuary mortgage, English mortgage, mortgage by deposit of title deeds, and anomalous mortgage. Now, each one has a specific definition, and anomalous mortgage is one which is not any of the other five mortgages. So, simple mortgage is one where the property is not delivered, but the mortgager, he undertakes to pay the mortgage money, and logically, if he fails to pay, then mortgagee has a right to sell the mortgage property and adjust the proceeds from the sale towards the mortgage loan as well as interest whatever has accrued. Now, any mortgage, if you see, depending upon what is the specific conditions of that mortgage, a mortgager always has a right to redeem the mortgage debt and get back the mortgage property. That is as per section 60. And if he fails to pay, then again, depending on the specific conditions of the mortgage, a particular kind of mortgage, there is a right to the mortgagee for foreclosure, that is section 67. So first we will understand what are the different kinds of mortgage. Simple mortgage I have already explained to you. Then there is mortgage by conditional sale, which is 58C. And here, what happens is the mortgager ostensibly sells the mortgage property. Now, what is ostensibly? Ostensibly means that it is stated to be, or it is appearing to be sold, but necessarily it is not so. And that is more reflected in this conditional sale, because here the mortgagor appears to have sold the property to the mortgagee, but unless there is a default in repayment of the mortgage money, the sale is not absolute. So the mortgagor has a right to get back his property. And therefore, when the mortgage money is repaid, the sale is either void or the buyer has to transfer back the property to the mortgagor. That is mortgage by conditional sale. Then in usufructory mortgage, the mortgagor hands over possession of the property to the mortgagee, and he authorizes the mortgagee to retain such possession and to receive income and appropriate the same towards interest on the mortgage debt or the principal or both. Now, in such a case, there are those subsequent provisions which come under the rights of mortgagor. So specific provisions where there is a conditional sale. So conditional sale is that property, though sold, on repayment, it has to come back. So that's a right of the mortgagor. Now, those when we come to rights of mortgagors from section 60 onwards, we will discuss that. But what I want to explain is what is the root, what is the basis of this entire provision. The entire provision goes on a very simple logic that money is received by a party as a security for repayment of that, an immovable property is given. Whatever rights, again logically, that accession, improvements, right to renewal of lease, all that what is available, naturally it is available to the mortgagor if you would have not mortgaged the property, is to come back to the mortgagor. And he has a right to redeem, that is to create a status quo ante, to restitute all the rights back to him, provided he pays back the mortgage debt. And therefore, when it is like a simple mortgage, then the mortgagor has a right to get back the mortgage deed, to restitute the property as if there was no mortgage debt. When if it is by conditional sale, to have the sale declared void or to retransfer the property back to him. And when it is a usufructuary mortgage, again get back the delivery of possession of the immovable property. So all those are mortgage specific rights, depending upon what kind of mortgage is. There are other general rights also which are available, which would be explained. But logically, if you understand in the definition itself, once you see the definition of mortgages, if thought about deeply, the right basically depending upon the each individual specific factors of a particular mortgage, the rights flow from that. The mortgagor as well as mortgagee, and there are certain further rights which are available to both. So in usufructuary mortgage, the possession is given and a party is entitled to get back the possession once the mortgagee recovers the entire debt to the income that generates from the property. there is a Supreme Court decision which I have stated, where it is stated that it is well established in law that the mortgage would not be entitled to in a usufructory mortgage when possession is given. If there is a lease which was already in existence when the mortgage was created, it doesn't mean that the mortgagor gets back the possession as if there was no leasehold rights created. So it would always be subject to that lease that the mortgagor gets back the possession. This is what was decided by the Honorable Supreme Court in Cherian versus Sundaresan. The next type of mortgage is mortgage by English. It's called English mortgage. And here the mortgagor binds himself to repayment by a certain date, and he transfers the property absolutely to the mortgagee, but however, subject to getting it retransferred back to him on repayment of mortgage money. So possession is given in three mortgages: mortgage by conditional sale, usufructuary mortgage, as well as English mortgage. There is very subtle differences between these three mortgages, which I will explain subsequently. There is another kind of mortgage which is mortgage by deposit of title deeds, which is more, more in operation as far as our country is concerned. In this case, the title deeds, original title deeds, are all handed over to the mortgagee, and there is no need for any written document. Even if there is a written document which just records the handing over of title deeds, that document need not be registered. That has been held by the Honorable Supreme Court. All other mortgages required to be registered if it is more than a particular amount. But mortgage by deposit of title deeds, there is no necessity if it's only a declaration of mortgage to register the same. The other kind of mortgage, which is an exception to all these mortgages, is the anomalous mortgage. That's the next kind of a mortgage, which is if it is not any other different those earlier kind of mortgages, then it would be a anomalous mortgage. And that anomalous mortgage, the rights which are provided, which is subsequently, which I will explain to you, is under section 98 of the Transfer of Property Act. The rights and liabilities of parties to anomalous mortgage are determined by the contract as is evidence in the mortgage deed. And so far as such rights are understood from the contract, or the contract doesn't provide for same, then by local usage. So this is a contract which is not specified, those conditions are not specified by the Act. It all depends upon local usage or what the parties decide as per the contract. So these are the different kinds of mortgages which the law has recognized. Now we go to the rights of the mortgagor. And if you look at the rights of the mortgagor, the first right itself is the right to redeem. The right to redeem is always available to the mortgagor unless, as per the proviso to section 60, he is then barred by a decree of the court, or if there is a sale, then the right to redeem is not available. That is called a clog on redemption. So a right to redeem is the basic right that a mortgager has. Because ultimately, what the mortgager has done is only to transfer the money for securing the money advance to him. Nowhere there is an absolute sale which has taken place. If the monies are repaid back at the right time and right place, or is it deposited in court without there being a foreclosure or a sale that has taken place, then there is a right to redeem. And the contrary to that is, if it is not paid, the mortgagee would have a right to foreclosure and for sale of the mortgage property for payment of the loan and the interest. Now, if you see, the mortgager also would have a right to have this property guys, himself may not have money to repay the mortgage money, borrow it from somewhere. Therefore, that right also has been provided to the mortgager, that one should not lose his property. He should have all opportunities to redeem the property, and therefore, even from a third party, he can obtain loan and request to repayment in the mortgage property. Those rights also are inherent to the mortgager. One important aspect is that if the mortgagee has spent money for creating these accessions or for improvements, then the mortgager will be bound to pay the mortgagee for the same. Again, very logical approach. Because if accession is being created by the mortgagee, or if there is any improvement in the property due to efforts and money spent by the mortgagee, then mortgager, to get benefit of that, definitely has to pay the mortgagee for whatever he has incurred. So these certain aspects which are provided are flowing from the entire gamut of this special law that is created, that is mortgage. Everything is in furtherance of the transaction. Whatever the rights available to the mortgager to have the properties redeemed separately or simultaneously also is beneficial and to help the mortgager get back his property. Because ultimately, what is that the mortgagee is entitled to? He is entitled to get back his money and the interest which is on the money that he has. The major part of the transaction is not that the mortgager loses the property. Mortgager continues to have the right and should get back his property. The mortgagee's to give money advance towards mortgage is not to purchase the property. If that was the case, then there would have been a sale. Is the basic intention of the parties is to secure the loan. So the mortgagee is entitled to get back his money. The foreclosure or the sale that he is entitled to is only a corollary for the failure of the mortgager to repay back the money. Mortgagee is not by right. Everything that flows in this provision relating to mortgage flows from that basic fact of the law, that is to secure the money advanced. So now when we are talking about the rights of the mortgagor, there is also certain obligations of the mortgagor which is under section 65. Now when the mortgage is given, certain aspects and provisions of law which are basic to the mortgage being created, and that runs with the contract to the benefit of the mortgagee or any transferee of the mortgagee. That is that there is a right in the mortgagor which subsists, and that he has the authority to give this property in mortgage. The law would require one cannot give a property to secure a debt in which one has no right or authority. So this is how the legislature has sought to protect a person who parts with his valuable money to a third party and wants a security for repayment of that money. So section 65 provides him that basic protection. If you had attended my last lecture relating to sale, even in sale, there is a similar kind of a provision where there is a covenant given of the owner's right or owner's title to sell the property. Similar kind is under section 65. Everything else which is in section 65 is to protect the rights of the mortgagee. That is, the mortgagor will defend his title or will give authority to the mortgagee to defend the title of the mortgagor. And the mortgagor will also pay all the public charges that arise so that there is no difficulty that is created on the mortgage property. And that where it is a lease, then all the covenants, where the property that is mortgaged is a leasehold property, the mortgagor has only a leasehold rights in the property, then all the covenants of the lease will be performed, all obligations will be performed, and the leasehold rights of the mortgagor will be protected. So all this goes to show that every aspect which would help the mortgagee recover back his possession is taken care of, and all possibilities whereby the mortgagor can get back his property is also taken care of. This is how the entire legislation is about. Also, under section 65A, there is a power where it is a mortgage property. The mortgagor can create a lease also, right? And there are certain restrictions which are provided in section 65A2 so that the mortgagee's rights are not compromised. Very aspects not kind of restraining the mortgagor if he is still in possession to make income out of the property, as well as if there is a right of mortgagee to be protected, then those rights are also sought to be absolutely protected by this provision. So if the mortgagor has a right to create a lease, the mortgagee's protection is that there should not be any covenant in the lease for renewal. Also, if there is a building which is mortgaged, then that lease should not be more than 3 years. So those are kind of provisions which are put in, restricting the rights of the mortgager to have unlimited rights to generate income. He has a right to generate income, but that cannot be an unrestricted right. There are restrictions which are put in so that the rights of the mortgagee are also protected. Now, also, if it is a property, there are chances that there would be routine waste. And if that routine waste is not due to willful act of the mortgager, then the mortgager is not liable for such routine waste. That to the minute, the legislation has considered. Every aspect related to property has been understood and has been dealt with. Very logical, common sense approach. This, if you just, without the provisions being there, we just think about it and we look at the provisions that the mortgage, there is a security, then every aspect which comes about subsequently from section 60 onwards, it is very much logical. Without there being such a provision, if two parties enter into any such contract, these are the provisions they would always think about. A prudent person wanting to mortgage the property, or a person who wants to lend money, will think from those lines only. So provisions are there, but despite the provisions, this is how normally a transaction should have been going through. Now, if you see, I'll just explain to you that certain activities which can be considered as being wasteful to the property. What we have stated is that mortgager would not be liable where there is kind of reasonable wear and tear, where there is waste in routine. But suppose the mortgager removes certain valuable fixtures from the mortgage property. From such that, the mortgager is not protected. That is by act of the mortgager. It is not routine which is. And in such an eventuality, if it is a willful act, then in such circumstances, subsequently I will explain, there is a provision which is again logical flowing from this, where the mortgagee would have right to secure further property from the mortgager to protect his mortgage money. That provision also I will explain to you. Now, if the mortgager pulls down, that again is not a routine waste. Specifically, certain wear and tear definitely takes place in a property. For that, the mortgager cannot be made liable. But if it's a deliberate or his own action, by his own action, that the value of the property is reduced or is compromised, then definitely the mortgager is liable. Right? So these are the provisions which is from section 60 to 66, except section 65. 65, as I pointed out, is an obligation to the mortgager towards the mortgagee. Other provisions are his rights that are to protect the mortgager from any losses that he is put to where he is not responsible, or that all which is necessary to protect his property. Now we will come to rights and liabilities of the mortgagee. The first right definitely is the right to foreclosure, right? The first right definitely is the right to foreclosure. The second right is to sue for mortgage money. Then there are special provisions which is applicable only once it is a English mortgage, and two specific, that is a right to sell the mortgage property without intervention of court. So section 69A also for a specific kind of a mortgage. It's not available for every kind of mortgage. Then there is right to access and enjoyment of mortgage property, right to renew the mortgage lease, right to spend for maintenance of mortgage property. All those are rights which are available to every mortgagee. So certain things, as I said, are mortgage specific and certain are general. So if you see the right to foreclosure, it is a right that is a protection or a fortification of the right of the mortgagee to secure his mortgage money. It can't be that it continues for all. So the saying goes, once a mortgage, always a mortgage, and the right to redeem is always available. But it can't be unlimited. A mortgagee can't just keep on waiting for his money to come. And therefore, the legislation has created the provision of foreclosure and sale. Completely opposite than Section 60, because Section 60 provides that if money is paid at the particular time and place, or is deposited in court at that time when the repayment is required to be made, then the mortgagor has a right to get redemption of the property. Otherwise, there will be a clause on the redemption, and that would be under the proviso where there is a foreclosure or a auction sale that has taken place. So Section 67 proceeds contrary to what 60 says, and that is that if the mortgagor fails to repay at that particular time or place, then the mortgagor can file a suit for foreclosure and for sale of the property to secure his property. This is how opposites go. If mortgagor performs his obligations, duties, he is protected. If he fails to do so, the mortgagee gets protection through foreclosure and by sale. So this is how the provisions relating to mortgagee, which is under section 67 to 77. Now, I pointed out to you that mortgagee has a right to sue for his mortgage money, and that is under section 68. If you can go to section 68, see the basic concept of section 68, that there has to be a wrongful act of the mortgagor or the mortgagee whereby the property is destroyed. If the property is destroyed by some accident or due to nature, then the mortgagee has a right from the mortgagor to deliver him another property that secures his interest, or he then has a right to file a suit for recovery of his mortgage money. Very, very important aspect are the words other than any wrongful act. So legislation has been very, very fair to both the parties. But then mortgages security also needs to be protected. Therefore, if during the tenure of the mortgage, where the time for repayment has not arisen, if the value of the is compromised, abused by any wrongful act of the mortgagor, then mortgagee needs to get a further security to protect his interests. This is how Section 68 proceeds on. Now, if you go to Section 69, it's a very special provision. Very special provision. Section 69 has conditions. If the mortgage deed gives a specific power to the mortgagee to sell the property without intervention of court, that power can be exercised. However, it depends upon certain conditions which are specified in the contract, in the section, sorry, in the section. Now, how logical or how and why the legislature thought to create these conditions is a matter of conjecture. However, this section applies only if the mortgage is an English mortgage and neither of the parties are Hindu, Muslim, or Buddhist, or any other tribe that the government notifies. So the first condition is that it should be an English mortgage. Now, if you have seen the definition of English mortgage, it is where the property is transferred absolutely, but with the power to have it retransferred back once the mortgage money is repaid. So in such a case, there is if the property is to be sold for recovery of the mortgage debt, then if none of the parties are of particular religion, then the mortgagee can sell the property without going to the court, without having a right of foreclosure or sale determined by the court. Second, as I pointed out, that such a power is expressly conferred and the mortgagee is the government, or when the property or any part of it is situated within the towns of Kolkata, Madras, and Mumbai, or any other specified towns as may be notified. So once those two conditions, either of those two conditions are fulfilled, the mortgagee need not go to court for foreclosure or sale. He can do so without intervention of court. This is a very special provision and very, very remotely used, because the mortgagor normally doesn't allow such a specific power to be expressly put in the contract unless it's an institutional mortgage which is created, and many of the institutional mortgages do have such provision. Now the conditions which has been set out and in that section is that there has to be a notice that has to be given, and there has to be a default for 3 months after such service. Then the interest amount should have to be 500 or more. So once these two conditions are also fulfilled, there would be a sale which can take place without intervention of court. And once such a sale is made, then whoever is the purchaser, he also needs to be protected, because ultimately the law has permitted the mortgagee to sell the property without going to court. So the mortgagor or any person claiming through him should not challenge the sale, and thereby the rights of the purchaser gets compromised. So it is specifically provided in the section that such a sale, in such a sale, the rights of the purchaser is not impeachable on the ground that one, no case has been made to authorize the sale, or that notice was not given, or that such a power was improperly or irregularly exercised. Because sale has taken place, there is certain provisions which are to be complied with, which is a notice, and that there has to be default of 3 months. But when the purchaser purchases it, he goes on the assumption that all those are complied with, not the precondition. The preconditions, if that would be the case, then the power of sale without intervention of court would not be available to the mortgagee unless those preconditions are fulfilled. Those are mentioned in the earlier part of the section, but which are technical in nature. That is this notice and default of 3 months and 500 rupees. All that would not be taken into consideration to challenge the rights of the purchaser in this sale. And how is this money is to be appropriated? That's also mentioned in the section, that money received by the mortgagee on such a sale shall be applied in payment of costs and then in discharge of mortgage money, and whatever remains, he cannot profit out of this sale. There cannot be any profiteering. So whatever remains is to be given to person who is entitled to the sale. Now that may be the mortgagor himself also. So again, very minutely, rights of the parties have been protected. Even the mortgagee, even though he may have lost out on the mortgage money, but he can't profiteer out of this provision. He is entitled only to get back whatever is due to him. Balance, residue part of it has to be returned back or given back to whoever is ultimately entitled to the same. Now, corollary to this is the provision of appointment of receiver, which is section 69A. 69A protects the mortgagee by having a right given to him to appoint a receiver. He can move the court, and or there can be a writing in the contract whereby to receive the income of the mortgage property, a receiver is appointed. And if there is no person who is named in the contract, then the mortgagor is entitled to apply to the court for appointment of such receiver. Again, logically, the powers of the receiver are set out in this. Everything, when for protection of the mortgagee, this provision is set out, then subsequent provisions are all for protection of the mortgagee. Like if the receiver is appointed, he is deemed to be an agent of the mortgagor. So the monies which are received, incomes which are received under the property, the receiver would be in a fiduciary capacity towards the mortgagor, and thereby the rights of the mortgagee are protected. So any wrongdoing of the receiver would be to the account of the mortgagor and not to the mortgagee. And there is also provision for income which is to be paid to the receiver, and he is entitled to 5% commission for whatever work he does. So every aspect, like if the mortgagee is unable to do certain things which are necessary for protecting his interest, that is to protect the income arising out of the property, if he is unable to do so, there can be in the contract a provision for appointment of a receiver to do so, right? So now when we go to section 71, 70 and 71, in rights of the mortgagor has a right to the accession that takes place in the mortgage property, as well as he has a right for renewal of lease, all those rights are also to the benefit of the mortgagee. So if after the date of mortgage, in the intermediate period, if there is any accession that takes place in the property, he would be entitled for benefit of the same for securing his interest. Now, mind well, everything or most of the provisions are in the absence of contract to the contrary. It's all subject to understanding between the parties. The law is only to help and benefit the parties. Parties can have a different understanding. So this is all subject to what the contract otherwise provides. But normally, if you see logically, as I pointed out, that even if there is no contract, even then this flows from the basic concept of the understanding, basic concept of the transaction itself, that if there is after the mortgage deed, if there is any accession which takes place to the property, that would definitely have to be to the benefit of the mortgagee to protect his debt that he has advanced to the mortgager. And corollary to that is that after the mortgage debt is paid, unless the mortgagee has expended to create this accession, the mortgager becomes entitled to the same. So it is for benefit of both the parties. The law has not tried to create any dispute relating to whom does it belong. It has laid down specific provisions as to how the entire transaction can be smoothly closed. Now, subsequent is if there is a lease, that mortgage property is a leasehold property, and if the mortgager obtains a renewal of the lease, then it is available to the mortgagee again for protection or for security of repayment of his mortgage money. In the For the mortgager, he has a right to renew the lease if the obligations you must have understood by now that if it is a mortgage property, is a leasehold property, the lessor, that is the mortgager, the lessee, sorry, the mortgager who is the lessee of that property is liable to pay and perform all the covenants of the lease so that the rights of the mortgagee are protected. Similar provisions detailing which has gone about in minute detail, every aspect is sought to be covered by such provisions. So when you look at everything, without these provisions being in force, also these rights in a normal transaction between a lender and the one who receives the money, certain aspects in local usage or custom or the understanding between the parties would normally be would be there. As I pointed out, that in a usufructuary mortgage, the mortgage property is delivered to the mortgagee, and definitely then he is in possession of that property. So he has rights that are provided to the mortgagee by specific provisions in section 72, and those rights are that he can protect the mortgage property from destruction, foreclosure, or sale. Then he has every right to protect the mortgage's title. As far as he himself is concerned, he has every right to making his title good against the mortgagors. And when there is a particular leasehold property which is renewable, he has every right to renew the lease. So these are some things which are necessary to protect a mortgagee who is in possession, and those rights have been minutely thought about and has been given to the mortgagee. So every aspect is being concerned and taken into consideration. Like if it is an insurable property, then the mortgagee may insure and protect the property from damages for any loss that may occur. And if such premiums are paid, money that has been lent to the mortgager, and he can charge interest on the same also. The subsequent provision is again absolutely logical and common sense approach. When the mortgage property is acquired or there is any sale that takes place because of default in payment of any revenue, then again the mortgagee is to be secured and his rights are definitely secured. So just whether the law provides or doesn't provide, it logically should be between the parties an understanding that if for any reason the property is sold. Now, corollary to the rights is definitely liabilities which a mortgagee has to be taken care of. And a right of the mortgagee when he is in possession is more stringent. If he is in possession and it is that property which is the security for him to be repaid his mortgage debt, then it is but natural that he has to manage that property as if it is his own property. Any prudent man, how he would protect his property, this is how he will have to protect the property. Then he has to pay all government revenues and all public charges that is payable on the property. He has to carry on all repairs that are necessary to keep the property in a proper manner. Then he cannot do any act that is destructive or will be permanently injurious to the property or will permanently destroy the property. Then if any insurance premium has to be paid or any insurance money if he receives, if the property is damaged, then he has to use such money to reinstate the property. He has to maintain proper accounts, and also he has to account for fair occupation rent, deducting whatever expenses he makes. So these liabilities which are of mortgagee in possession is normally the usufructuary mortgagee who gets the property to have his mortgage money repaid through the income that generates out of the property. But then he has responsibility towards the mortgager to protect the mortgage property as the mortgager on repayment of the mortgage debt. Once the mortgagee gets back his, then the property has to go back to the mortgager. So the mortgagee has to protect and do as if whatever the mortgager would have done to protect his property. Ultimately, everything is creating a balance between the rights of a mortgager and the mortgagee. Now, there is also a provision where the mortgagee under section 76 He has to do his best to collect the rents and profits. Everything what is required so that the income is recovered from the mortgage property in repayment of the mortgage debt, the mortgagee in possession has to perform. Each and every aspect, if you see it, is creating a balance and protecting both the mortgager and mortgagee. Now, under section 78, when we come to now, we now come to the priorities. Priorities relating to rights of mortgages when there are more mortgages than one. That possibility also is there, that a mortgager on the same property may create 2 or more mortgages. So those are also sought to be taken care of by the legislature under section 78 and 79. Corollary to section 79 is section 93. So I will consider all the 3 sections now, which is 78, 79 and 93. Now, 78 is if there is already a mortgage which is created and due to fraud or gross neglect of the prior mortgagee, some other person is also induced to advance money on the security of the mortgage property. Then naturally, if there is a fraud or a neglect by the prior mortgagee, it is his fault. Now he cannot be allowed to take advantage or take benefit of his own wrong. And therefore, the law punishes him. And punishes him how? Punishes him to put him subject to the right of the subsequent mortgage. So his right to the mortgage property becomes subsequent or is postponed to the right of the subsequent mortgagee. Again, is based on absolute justice. It may happen that the mortgager and the mortgagee join hands and defraud a third party. So that aspect has also been taken into account and the legislature has dealt with it. Another is there would be a contract that is entered into to secure future advances. And it could be a running account also, where a maximum amount is specified and then the mortgage debt is given in installments. The rights of the prior mortgagee in such a scenario, if it is part of the contract, gets protected to the maximum amount that would be paid as a mortgage debt under the contract. In this case, even if the subsequent mortgagee, even in the subsequent mortgagee did not have the notice of any such understanding between the mortgager and prior mortgagee, he will be bound by that. If he has notice, definitely he is bound by it. But even if he does not have notice of it, he is bound because the mortgage is to secure future advances also, right? So in such a scenario, the subsequent mortgagee cannot say that I was not aware of it and therefore I would not be bound by this prior mortgage and my right has a priority over the prior mortgagee. You would not be entitled to make such a submission. However, this section 79, which is provides for securing of the uh, amount when minimum is expressed or maximum is expressed, that's an exception to a provision under section 93, which is a prohibition against tacking. Now, as I have earlier pointed out, always that provisions of law are always common sense or logical in majority of the aspects. On certain aspects, it is not, and in certain aspects, the law, the legislation to create relevance to the advocates uses certain words or certain principles which would not be readily understood by laymen. So one such provision is this tacking. And tacking, really what it means? Tacking is an English common law doctrine which allows a lender who made first advance under a loan and has taken security for repayment of that loan to get that same security attached to a subsequent loan, not arising out of the same contract, not a future advance, but subsequently a fresh advance that he makes. He has a priority over a second lender, though he may have made the lending subsequent to the second lender, but since he had prior lending, he attaches that to any subsequent lending that takes place. That is the English common law doctrine of tacking. Under section 93, that is prohibited in India. And again, very logically thought about, otherwise there would be complete uncertainty in the mercantile world. Anybody can create such a right, and a subsequent lender would always be under an uncertainty as to whether his rights are protected, whether his security is enough for his protection of his mortgage debt. So to create a certainty, to create a stability in the mercantile world, I think section 93 has been brought about, which prohibits such a right which is provided to a lender. So again, a very important provision. This is, however, not applicable where provisions of section 79 are applicable. So that has to be kept in mind. That is where there is a maximum provided and it's paid in installments at that particular time, even if the maximum amount ultimately is paid subsequently to a subsequent lender, even then there is a protection in priority to the subsequent lender. But if there is a subsequent lending, which is a fresh lending, then that priority is not available to the lender. The subsequent lender would have priority. So it's a very important aspect which is to be taken into consideration while considering the provisions of mortgage law. Now, marshalling also, if you remember, is a provision which is in sale. Marshalling, like if a mortgager has given two or more properties as as security to one person, and one or more of those properties to a subsequent mortgagee, then in the absence of contract to the contrary, the subsequent mortgagee has a right to insist that the prior mortgagee be satisfied from the properties that are not given as security to the subsequent mortgagee. Again, a very balanced and a fair provision protecting both the parties, the prior mortgagee as well as the subsequent mortgagee. but it can't be to the detriment of the prior mortgagee. That's the only condition. However, both rights are protected. So that's called marshalling of securities. It really means that one of the mortgage property can be sold off and prior mortgagee can be paid off, and the subsequent mortgagee gets benefit of the other properties. But again, these words are used, marshalling securities, which a layman would not easily understand. Now, if you look at provisions of when the interest stops, that again is a very logical provision, that interest would continue to apply only when the mortgage debt is payable. Now, moment the mortgager or any other person deposits or tenders the mortgage money that is due in court, which is provided under section 83, then the interest would cease to be payable. Mortgage money has to be paid. Either it is paid to the mortgager, and if the mortgage paid by the mortgager to the mortgagee, and for some reason, if he is unable to pay to the mortgagee, then he can deposit in court, and the liability of interest stops. So section 84 that provides for cessation of interest in the circumstances as are mentioned in that section. Now, question would arise as to who can sue for redemption. Now, that has been dealt with in section 91 of the Transfer of Property Act. Now, you must be wondering that why from section 84 I have jumped to section 91. That's because that sections 85 to 90 are repealed. So therefore, after 84, directly there is section 91. So I have to go to 91. I can't discuss 85 to 90. So now the question arises, who can sue for redemption? Again, very logical and common sense. And one lawyer friend who practices in intellectual property was telling me that he will have a copyright for this sentence for me. That everything legislature thinks common sense and logical, that would be a copyright for me now. He's going to put it, register it under a trademark copyright for me. So if you see this, who may sue for redemption? Now, everyone who has any interest or on the charge upon the property mortgage, he would have a right to redeem the property. Then anyone who is a surety for payment of the mortgage debt, he can also sue for redemption. Even a creditor can sue for redemption, but the condition is that he must have obtained a decree for sale of the mortgage property where he has filed a suit for administration of estate. So all these people have a right to sue for redemption and get back the mortgage property. Of course, subject to the mortgagee being paid his mortgage debt and the interest. Now we come to subrogation. Now, subrogation again is a very interesting aspect of law, that if any person, now we saw in previous section 91, that any person who is interested in the property can file a suit for redemption and get a redemption. Now, there would be possibility that it would be a person other than the mortgagor, which is already explained in section 91. So if
in such a case, what happens is that the person who redeems the property, he has the same rights against the mortgagee, which the mortgager would have. And he comes into the shoes of the mortgagee. If he is a third party, he comes into the shoes of the mortgagee whose mortgage has been redeemed. So he gets the rights of the mortgagee also. Now, the most important aspect is that there cannot arise any right of subrogation unless the mortgage is redeemed in full. Now, that's a very important aspect. There cannot be part payment and we can say that there is a subrogation for that part. The entire mortgage should be redeemed. Only then there would be a right of subrogation that is created. And it is like coming into the shoes of a other party, either of the shoes of the mortgager towards any right of the against the mortgager or the mortgagee, or coming into the shoes of the mortgagee and getting protection from the mortgager. So this is how the right of subrogation goes. Now section 93 I have already explained. So we go to section 94, which is rights of a mean mortgagee. Now this MESNE, MESNE is to be pronounced as mean, MEANE. I have seen many students, even many people who have been practicing for many years, pronouncing it as mean mortgagee or mean intermediate. So there are two words in this, which is mean mortgagee and posterior. Mortgage is posterior to himself. Posterior means second in rank, subsequent in rank. So where a property is mortgaged for successive debts, two successive mortgages, a mean mortgagee, that is an intermediate mortgagee, has the same rights against the mortgagees posterior to himself as he has against the mortgager. So all his rights which are against the mortgages which are subsequent in rank to him, he would have the same right as he has right against the mortgager. Now, this mean, many who practice in small causes or where in landlord-tenant or lessor-lessee dispute would be aware of, there is something like the mean profits. Also, there again the spelling that we pronounce to the recovery for the damages that the landlord would have been suffering. So 94 provides for the rights of the intermediate mortgagee. He would have the same right against the subsequent mortgagee as he would have against the mortgager. The other right for a redeeming co-mortgager, it provides for if there are more than one mortgager or more than one owner, that is a right that is under section 95. And it provides that if one of the several mortgagers have redeemed the mortgage property, he can enforce his right of subrogation against the other co-mortgagers, and he is also entitled to add to the mortgage money that is payable or recoverable from such co-mortgagers that he has incurred for redemption in proportion to their share in the mortgage property. So normally, many times the view is, if this person is doing it, let him do it. Why should we worry? And let him pay, and we'll enjoy the benefits from the background. That is not available. The law has taken into consideration the mentality of such people and have stated that, sorry, if one co-mortgager of yours has reading, then if you have to take benefit of that, you will have to pay back, because he gets subrogated into the shoes of the mortgagee for recovery of the other shares which are liable to be paid by the other co-mortgages, as well as whatever for the expenses that he may have incurred. So that aspect also has been covered. Now, Section 96 is a provision which just provides that in the case of mortgage by deposit of title deeds, all those provisions which earlier provisions which are applicable relating to simple mortgage are also applicable as far as in case of a mortgage by deposit of title deeds. So therefore, if there is a right to sue for recovery, there is a right to sue for foreclosure or sale, all that rights is also applicable, or those provisions become applicable in case of mortgage by deposit of title deeds also. And Section 98, I have already explained when I was explaining Section 58G, anomalous mortgage, that the rights and liabilities of parties to an anomalous mortgage would be determined by the contract, or if not so evidence in the mortgage deed, then by local usage. Very, very important, because anomalous ultimately is governed by the contract or by local usage. It is ultimately how the parties decide how the mortgage would be. So therefore, specifically, it is then left to the parties themselves, and in that absence, to local usage. As regards the aspect of mortgage is concerned, I have explained and dealt with. Now, what remains is charge, and charge is really a charge for which is created by an act of parties or by operation of law, and it is a security for the payment of money to a third party, but it's not in the nature of mortgage, because there is no transfer of interest in the property or any interest therein is created. It's only a right that is created for payment of some amount that is entitled to a party from a party who owns the property. So I've also put in the PPT a judgment of the Honorable Supreme Court which explains charge. Then Section 101, if you go through Section 101, it is providing for aspect of merger. Now merger, if you would be aware that if a holder of a larger interest or a holder of a lesser interest acquires a larger interest, then there is a merger that takes place. So if there is a lessee and he purchases the property, then lessee's right in the property is lesser or inferior to that of the absolute right which is of a owner. So the right of the lessee gets merged into the rights of the owner, and therefore one cannot be a lessee of himself. So he becomes the owner. Now, Section 101 provides for certain conditions or situations where it says that there is no merger in case of subsequent encumbrance. Here, what is taken into account is that if there is a mortgagee or if there is a person who has a charge on an immovable property and they purchase or acquire the rights of the mortgager in the property without thereby causing the mortgage or charge to be merged between himself and a subsequent mortgagee or a subsequent charge upon the same property, then whoever is the subsequent mortgagee or a charge holder, he shall not be entitled to foreclose or sell such property without first redeeming the prior mortgage or charge. So that's an exception created in law by legislation that normally when there is a inferior right who purchases the superior right, both the rights get merged. But in this case, if there is this mortgagee or person having a charge, even if he purchases the property, the subsequent mortgagee cannot submit or cannot make a case saying that the rights of the mortgagee is now merged because he is the owner, or he doesn't have a right now for his mortgage debt, or the charge holder cannot have a charge on the property because ultimately he is the purchaser. The law creates an exception and says that, sorry, the subsequent mortgagee has to pay this prior mortgagee or the charge holder before he forecloses his right as a subsequent mortgagee. It's a very subtle but an important aspect of law. Now, 102 and 103 are the provisions which are relating to how service is to be made to an agent. Now, if any notice has to be served or made, under this chapter that is relating to mortgage and charge, then if the parties do not reside in the district in which the property is situated, then service or tender of notice has to be on an agent who is the general power of attorney holder from such person, or is otherwise authorized to accept such service. And when there is no such person, then the person who wants to serve the notice has to approach the court. So this provides for benefit of the parties again, that somebody cannot take advantage of their own wrong, that if he is not available, he can't just run away. So all these provisions are made to protect the rights of the parties. Now 103, which is that where any person is incompetent to contract. Now, again in this, there are two words which are used, two legal terms. One is legal curator and another is guardian ad litem. Now, the question that arises is, immediately it arises into the minds of students and who are not used to or not very experienced in their practice in law, is ultimately who is this legal curator and who is this guardian ad litem? Because if a person is incompetent to contract and if notice is to be given to him, then he can't be given the notice. So law has appointed people who are competent to accept notice on behalf of such persons. And who are those? Those are one who is a legal curator or one who is a guardian ad litem. Now, who is a legal curator? Now, legal curator is one who has been legally appointed to take care of the interests of one who account of his maybe minor be of his being a minor, or due to his a defect in him in understanding things, or for some other cause he is incompetent to contract, then legal curator is the one who is appointed to take care of him, to take care of his interests. That is a legal curator. And so a legal curator can be served a notice on behalf of these persons under section 103. The other is guardian ad litem. And guardian ad litem is a person who is appointed by the court. And it may be under the Hindu Minority Act, or it would be under the Guardians and Wards Act. So he is appointed by the court to represent the child and to protect their interests, and he also has a right to represent them, that is the minor as well as the person who has a deficiency in understanding. He can represent them in court proceedings also. So both these people, a legal curator or a guardian ad litem, are authorized to accept notice on behalf of the minor or other persons who are incapacitated. And the last provision which I have to deal with today is under that section 104. Section 104 is one which gives power to the Honorable High Court for making rules, and that rules are for superintendents for carrying out the provisions of this act or of this chapter. So 104, if we go to 104, and there is a judgment which I have put in the relevant place, where it is the High Court, our High Court, Bombay High Court has held that rules which have been framed under this section by various high courts, such rules would prevail over the general terms of the Code of Civil Procedure. So if any specific rule has been framed by the Honorable High Court, as is in the Bombay High Court rules, then such rules would have prominence or will prevail upon the general terms of the Code of Civil Procedure. Thank you.